Okay, so hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for what is the first product tank of Belfast 2021, the first product tank of what I'm now calling the COVID era. And for any of the regular attendees to the Belfast product tank, you'll also notice this is also my first as co-organizer alongside the lovely Eilish and Graham. I will be passing you over to Graham in a moment, and he will give you a bit of an intro and run through this evening's agenda. But before I do that, I will just go over some brief housekeeping, just to sort of keep us all up to date with what's going to happen. So this is also our first time broadcasting Product Tank Belfast live on YouTube. So do definitely say hello via the comments box on the right-hand side of your screen. And also just make sure to tell us where you're from. Sort of might as well take advantage of the fact that we are broadcasting this live outside of tiny Belfast as well. I know this isn't quite the same as attending in person, having a bit of a chit-chat beforehand and getting your free beer and pizza. But hopefully you do have some beer of yourself, and we can try to make this as interactive as possible. So do make sure to leave any comments or any questions for our guest speaker and also the panel. Make sure to post them in throughout the event. So don't just leave it to the end to the panel session and the Q&A session, or they might get missed. Mark will be picking out some viewers' questions to discuss with the panel, so feel free to make those as tough as possible. So with that, we are ready to go, and I will pass you over to Graham.
Thanks, Stephen. So, are you going to share the slides? Brilliant, thank you. Thanks, Stephen. So just a brief overview of what Product Tank and Product Tank Belfast. So Product Tank started in 2010 in London, and followed by the first Minded Product Conference 2012. They're free to attend. They're organised by volunteers and supported by generous sponsors. I think the last time we had a Product Tank last year, I think it was around about 150 cities, and it's now up to 250 plus. So huge network. Product Tank Belfast was started in 2016, and we have a community over 1,000 people. So one thing that's new to Mind the Product is the new membership. So you've got 3 levels of membership. So you've got Insider, which is the free membership level. Quite similar to what you could have got previously with Mind the Product around content and curated newsletters. And we also have the Prioritize and Leader membership models. And they come with a lot of additional benefits, including access to exclusive events. So please have a look at the page on the Mind the Product website around membership. And just to highlight, you can actually get a Mind the Product membership if you purchase a ticket for one of the Mind the Product digital conferences. And the next one is on the 14th and 15th of April, and that's a digital APAC conference, and you'll get an automatic membership. So as Stephen said, we now have 3 Product Tank organisers, and I'm delighted to have Eilish and Stephen to support me, and I'll be the face that should be best for radio. So I'm going to hand over to Eilish.
Hi everyone. So 2021 has been a really crazy year. So we're really trying to take into account the situation that we're in, being that we're all working remotely from home. So we're going to try out a number of different times and formats, and also take advantage of this as a unique opportunity to have international speakers as well as local speakers. And taking feedback on board, we really want to give you tangible takeaways for you to take into your product roles. locally. So I'm really excited to introduce the next event. We have David Bland is going to come on to speak through his latest book, which is Testing Business Ideas. It's part of the Strategizer series. I'm very passionate about this one. Do you know, if you are trying to make innovation happen within a large corporate or even within a startup, like this is basically your Bible for rapid experimentation. So he's going to chat through how to test out ideas, different business models, identifying risk and assumptions, and is going to talk through both discovery and validation experiments. There'll be a working exercise and there'll be a Q&A. So do look out for that coming. It'll be at 8 p.m. on the 24th of March. So a call for speakers, sponsors, volunteers, as always. We would absolutely love to hear from you. So just reach out and meet up to any of our lovely co-organisers and get in touch. I want to thank tonight's sponsor, Bazaar Voice. All of the money they've put forward has been directly donated to Esther to help vulnerable people that are living in poverty in Belfast. So finally, I want to introduce tonight's theme, Managing Product Equals Managing Tension, inspired by the man that actually wrote the book on it, Marc Abraham, head of product at ASOS. So I know personally, working in product, you know, you're dealing with a lot of uncertainty and therefore and therefore tension. So I'll personally looking forward to taking away learnings from that, as well as our wonderful panel. We have local speakers as well as those that are further afield. So we have Amir Chisti, he is product manager at DataCamp. We have Aisling McGibbon, Senior Manager of Product at Bazaar Voice. We have our very own co-organiser, Graham Stewart, Product Manager at AFLAC. And we have Zara Hedgeman, Product Owner at Digitech Galaxis. So I'm going to hand over to Marc Abraham to chat us through how to manage product tension.
Excellent. Thank you, first of all, for having me. Let me just give you, in a very quick kind of time period, I'll give you a quick overview of the background of the conversation tonight. And in my book, and what we'll do tonight is talk a lot about leaning in and what are the benefits of tension. You know, it's very natural to be afraid of tension, and we'll talk about the different types that we can encounter when managing products. But the whole point of why I wrote the book in the first place is that tension can also pave the way for growth. To do that, I think it's important to acknowledge tension, to analyze the tension, and using tension as a springboard. Because if you think about product management, there's three components that make up the product management equation, if you like, and each component in their own right can cause a lot of tension. If you think about the mind of ourselves, the people that we work with, our customers. We think about the matter of the product that we're working with. So what is the product made of, whether it's software code or if it's a hardware product, the materials that we're working with. And then finally, the moves that we make or don't make in relation to our product. So the decisions that we make or the learnings that we fail to implement. You can imagine that each of these components in their own right can cause a lot of tension, but particularly if you combine them, and that's what we do on a day-to-day basis as product people, tension can be galore. And therefore, I recommend that we start leaning into that tension, acknowledging what's happening. Is there tension? Be open about it, understand what type, what is causing the tension, what's the impact, what's the best way to respond to that tension, analyze it even further to say, all right, okay, I'm not going to succumb to the tension, if you like, but I'm going to pause. I'm going to take a moment. I go to the balcony. It's one technique that you can definitely take away to really take that step back and creating a moment of choice as a result, because you have options when there's tension occurring when you work on products. For instance, when you're on the balcony, you're taking that step back, you know, the tension is hitting you, you're overwhelmed, you're dealing with a difficult colleague or stakeholder. You're really taking a moment to say, stop, what's the bigger picture here? What does this situation mean to me? What does this situation look like to others? How does this appear to an outsider, someone more detached from the situation or the tension? And then finally, think about the wise mind. What would be the best thing to do here? And this is where you start thinking about the options that you have when faced with attention. And then finally, using tension as a springboard. Again, it's very natural to be afraid of tension and think, I want perfect harmony. I want things to go to plan. I want everyone to be nice to each other. And I want my product to perform the way I hope it will perform. But equally, you could say, use that tension, acknowledge it, analyze it, and then use it as a springboard to say, this is a source of information. This is an opportunity to restate a problem and to react differently, and really using it as a source of strength. So tonight we'll talk about ways to start leaning in, to start getting more comfortable with tension, embracing it in a way. So we'll ask questions like, how do you respond to tension? Is it something you dread or optimize? And how do you work with others when it comes to managing tension? And what you should get at the end of today's panel conversation is a really good steer of what that tension looks like, how we respond to it, and also some practical ways of dealing with the tension that you can apply to your own situation. So I think we're good to stop sharing the screen now, Stephen, if that's okay. So I can see the lovely panel, and I'm going to start with my first question. And like Stephen said in the introduction, please feel free at any point. I'll keep an eye on the questions. I know the others will too. Drop in any thoughts or questions that you have, because once we get to the Q&A stage, we'll try to cover as many of those as possible. But the first question I have, and I'm going to start with Graham. When was the last time you experienced tension, not necessarily with the kids and the home situation, but managing products, I should maybe add?
I was actually obviously going to start with that. It's probably the most challenging time for all of us and for our families, having to deal with product people at home, not unable to work at a proper whiteboard. But I think it's interesting if I think about all the different places I've worked, but trying to think about it from a Belfast perspective and a more local perspective, maybe outside of London. I think about the kind of the makeup of the organizations here. So you have a lot of what people call of FDIs, foreign direct investment. That normally means a lot of US multinational organizations coming in. And if you think about the very relationship between those organizations and then these offices they set up, these product and technology offices, just at the very outset, it's sometimes you don't appreciate the tension that's already there at the very start. And what I mean by that is, so if you think about the local teams are new, they come in, but they start to feel maybe they're not being given the valuable work, not just given the stuff that the other teams and the organizations don't really want to do. They really want to get involved in more strategic work. And then with the team, say in the US or wherever, at times when they start out, they may look at these offices as like offshore, contract houses, and that these offices don't have the product expertise. And they're too far away from customers, and they don't really know the domain, right? So just looking at that for a start, it's already a challenge before you even start, doing the job. So for me, that's one of the things, and that's consistent within this city and other cities outside of the main hubs. And the big challenge or the big opportunity, I suppose, is how to combine and complement that domain expertise and experience with maybe the product and technology experience that you have in these new offices in hubs like Belfast and so on. So I would say for me that's quite a relevant thing for this city, but I would say a lot of other hubs as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing, Graham. And I appreciate that as a more kind of fundamental piece. That's really critical. I want to see if anyone can beat me with respect to when I last experienced tension, which was this afternoon, when I found out that our CTO had gone straight to an engineering team and putting something on their backlog that we deprioritized on his insistence 2 months ago. So And that's, that's the tension of how do you then clarify that? Do you understand where it's coming from? How do you find the balance again or reprioritize? So I'm curious to see if anyone can beat that, if it's anything more recent than that, when they felt that tension. Amir, tell me, when did you feel tension for the last time?
I mean, I'm going to throw that back and say, like, I don't actually remember the last time I didn't feel tension. It feels like, I think with this job, there's just like a certain surface level amount of tension that is just like prevalent and always present. And for me, that's just because there's like so much uncertainty inherent in every part of the job. I'm always asking myself, like, did we build the right thing? Are we building the right thing? Is what we're going to do have an impact? Am I making the right decisions? Did I do the right thing in that moment? And yeah, it's really hard to know in the moment whether you've done the right thing or not. I remember, like, when I was younger, I had like a job at a call center, and this is when I was in like college, and we used to have metrics, right? It was like, you need to answer this many calls in an hour. You need to, like, a call needs to last this long and that sort of stuff. And it was super simple to know whether you're like doing the right thing or not. Whereas I think we're playing a game of imperfect information where you can do everything right and you can still, I guess, lose. You might not deliver something that drives impact, and you might deliver something that doesn't actually help the business or the customer out. So I'm actually struggling to think of a time where I didn't feel tension. So yeah.
Cool. No, you trumped me definitely. Aisling, how about you? When was the last time you experienced tension?
Yeah, I'm pretty similar to you. I think this role inherently has tension, but I think that's also a healthy thing. Like, we should have product tension when we're working with our teams, when we're working with our stakeholders. People who work in product development teams know there are so many stakeholders that we have to collaborate with, we have to try and empathize with, understand things from their perspective. What are their pain points, what are their problem areas, and it's our role to understand and prioritize that work. Make that difficult call. Are we going to fix that, or are we going to leave that to a later date and fix something else? And I think, as most of you know, stakeholders always believe their problem is the most important. It should be prioritized above everything else. Do we innovate on this or do we fix that? And really, like, weighing up those options. So I think every day I face tension, but I also think that's a healthy thing. And I think it's important that, especially as our junior product owners and product managers are training up, that they learn how to deal with that, because it is inherent and it's not going to go away.
Gotcha. Thank you for sharing. And Zara, last but not least.
Yeah, I can definitely agree. I would say it's a roller coaster of tension, so highs and lows. With the next initiative that we're planning from one of our main stakeholders, I got a huge thumbs up. Awesome, super innovative, great idea. My team said, "Oh, we love this. This is the coolest thing we've done. I've been waiting years for this. We're so excited." We started. They even started wanting to develop right away. They're super excited. And then I go to the next stakeholder. That's an awful idea. You can't do that. Like, oh, no. And then sort of finding this balance to say, hey, we do believe in it. How can we maybe experiment to find out if it's true, the positive hypothesis that we have and the negative ones, and just sort of finding that balance, understanding their concerns, but also standing true to what we believe in, and also realizing, hey, if it doesn't work out, it's most likely not the end of the world, and we learn something through it. So sort of a lot of up and downs for sure.
Gotcha. Product management roller coaster, it sounds like.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's interesting that I think both Aisling and Zara mentioned about stakeholders. Just really quickly, Graham, can you give me an example of an ideal stakeholder that you really enjoy working with? What traits does he or she need to have? Graham, I think you're muted. There's always needs to be one. The number of monologues I've held with myself, basically.
Hello?
Yes,
Hello?
back.
Sorry.
Just give us a few traits of what makes a good kind of stakeholder to work with. Because then I'm going to flip the question for Zara and ask about maybe a bad stakeholder that's difficult or to work with.
Sure. I suppose, and like I try not to give the "it depends" answer, the product, standard product "it depends" answer. But sometimes the scenario, it depends on what you want, so the stakeholder, it depends on what you're asking of that stakeholder. Is it a stakeholder you need validation from? Is it a decision maker? Do you need their time? Do you need to win them over? There's that kind of the kind of credit framework, of managing stakeholders, which I think is really useful. The commonality, reciprocity, I said that wrong, empathy, difference, and trust. But I think it depends. What you want is someone who kind of, I suppose, is giving you support, but you've had to earn that support ordinarily. They will validate your idea, your concept, what you're doing, and give you honest feedback. I mean, honest feedback is the key here. You don't want someone that's just going to say, yes, it's a great idea. To Sarah's point, it's a great idea, and you get to the crunch and then say, it's not a great idea after all. And that's what you need. You need those kind of messages early. But decision-making stakeholders, they are slightly different to the ones you're using for validation, I would say.
Gotcha. Zara, any kind of, already I could see that G. Inger says a perfect stakeholder. Is that like a unicorn? So I can see the sentiment there. Zara, what do you feel is makes it difficult to work with people sometimes, whether stakeholders or colleagues?
One thing that I think is really important is to gain a mutual trust, so that, for example, with my idea where some of them said, no way, bad idea, that I can help build trust with them to show, hey, I understand your concerns. This is what our things, how can we get to this next level? And I think if there's no basis to start building this trust where they micromanage, where they give solutions, where they're not open to discussion, where they're not open to sharing their ideas and their concerns and just say this way or the highway, I think that's really hard to build that mutual trust and good collaboration. So just being open with the critical things, being open to things that might fail, I think that's really important at the beginning, and maybe taking little baby steps if necessary.
And how do you get comfortable with that? Because Aisling, I thought was really interesting how you talked about healthy tension and getting your team members who might be a bit more junior to be comfortable with that. I want an honest, first of all, maybe if I can start with you, Aisling, is that something you've always had, or is that something you had to learn to get comfortable? Or, because I can be honest, I dreaded tension, like it was no one's business, basically. I'd rather, used to avoid it or get really defensive instead of embracing it. But you're talking about, treating as healthy tension and accepting it. What was that journey like for you?
I think it's definitely something that takes some time to get used to. I know when I first moved into a product role, I really struggled with saying no to people. I think that's a personal thing too. You want to be liked by your team members, by your stakeholders, and sometimes it is difficult and it takes time to get used to saying no. And similarly, one thing that I struggled with when I first moved into product, 7-8 years ago, was that you don't have to decide right there on the spot when, a stakeholder asks you something or asks you to commit to something, or an engineer on your team that, if someone came to me and said, is it A or B? I went, it's A. But I didn't know why I was picking A. I just felt the pressure to answer and to provide some direction. And, I learned that quickly, that it's okay to say, I need more details. These are the types of data or the pieces of information I need to make that decision. And to say, you know what, I need some time to think that through. I will get back to you. So I think for me, they were the biggest and quickest 2 learnings that I had when I moved into product. And for people who are, on that journey, getting used to that tension, I think it's knowing that it's normal. Every product manager, product owner is experiencing it too. You have support around you, and also you're not always going to make the right call. You're going to get it wrong. But for me, what's really important is being transparent about why you've made a decision. So, I've chose A based on the information I have for these reasons. This is what I don't know. These are my assumptions. So that, in 2 or 3 weeks, if something turns around that actually I should have went for B, my team understand why I made the original decision. And I'm the first one to put my hand up and say, do you know what? If we had this data, I would have made a different decision. So for me, the support network, around the product owner and product manager is important too.
Thank you. No, that makes, yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And it's an interesting journey. And I like what you're saying about being able to just not give that instant answer, but being comfortable with saying, let me look into this, or I don't know, or I'll come back to you. Amir, what has that journey been for you? Have you always been, I don't know, I don't want to assume, did you used to dread it? Are you, you're happy with that tension because you said you feel it every day? How has that been for you?
I mean, I think you either need to learn how to live with it and manage it, or it's going to kind of just like crush you. And for me, that's been a bit of like, that was a bit of a learning journey. I remember, so I joined a pretty early stage startup, and that was like a bit of a radical shift to I guess like the more mature companies I'd worked in the past. I remember I had a one-to-one with the CEO after like a particularly bad week, and he basically just said to me, it was like, your emotions are like this, like up and down, but what you actually need to be doing is like be more flat, like keep things a bit more like steady. And that's, it's been like 5 years since we had that conversation, but I still think it's like one of the most meaningful bits of advice that I've been given. It's kind of interesting because I think if you approach things like in this idea of keeping things flat, it does mean the highs are probably not going to be as high as they could be, but it does also mean that the lows are nowhere as low as they are. And for me, I find that super valuable, and it helps me like deal with the tension and not let it, I guess, like hold me back or stop me.
And have you got any tips for me? Let's assume I'm still a fairly junior product person, or I'm highly experienced, but either way, I'm struggling with this idea of managing my emotions and being a bit more flat, as you call it, right? Because I've always been super passionate about product. I really want to get into product. I'm super passionate about the things I work on. I love my customers. So, Amir, that sounds great, rationally speaking, but I struggle. Have you got any tips or techniques for me?
This is going to sound really cheesy when I say it, but I've like gotten a lot of value at looking at this idea of like Stoic philosophy, which is like an old philosophy from like the Roman times. And there was this philosopher, dude by the name of Epictetus, and he talks about how there are things inside your control and things that are outside your control. And worrying about the things outside of your control it's just like a gigantic waste of time, essentially, because you can't do anything about it. So, focus on what you can like control yourself, which is like how you interpret things going on, how you approach your work, how you approach like, your self-development and things. Those are all things inside your control. As long as you do a good job there, hopefully then like great outcomes will happen as a result. So yeah, the more time you keep, like for me personally, I found that the more time I spent worrying about things outside of my control, it was the more time, like it was just taking me away from things, from time I could spend actually, focusing on myself and doing a better job and feeling better and like better handling the tension. So yeah.
Nice point. I think I think it's Stephen Covey who, to your point, Amir, distinguishes between the circle of concern, which can be huge, and versus a circle of influence, where you can actually say, these are the battles I can pick or where I can make a difference. And I think that's such a powerful thing to sometimes keep in mind, because we can be concerned about lots of things, half of them or even more we can't do anything about as much as we want to. Thank you for sharing that. The million-dollar question is, again, going back to Aisling's original point about healthy tension. We've talked about it, how you accept it, and giving feedback and being a bit more flat. But what's the... Can you give me an example of unhealthy tension, or something that's started as healthy tension, turned into something which is very unhealthy and actually, was abused by people or the situation? Because, I don't know if I pronounce it right, but I can see a comment from, is it Emer O'Kane, who says, tension can be healthy, especially when underpinned by a healthy working relationship. Some of the most difficult conversations I've had with devs have resulted in really sound product decisions, which is a great point by Emer. But obviously there can be a thin line, and if you're not comfortable with giving feedback, or as Emer says, having those difficult conversations, and any tips there? Where have you seen it go wrong? Anyone wants to share an example there? Aisling, I think Have you seen that thin line between healthy and unhealthy tension?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to your question around like stakeholders and how we manage them. So, I mean, I have an example from a few years ago where, I was working with a startup and with a CEO who I felt that we had a lot of tension because, in terms of co-founders and the CEO, they had a great idea they wanted to progress with, but they didn't really buy into the process of, we need to check if there is desirability from a customer perspective. Is this a viable business idea in the market? Like, we knew it was technically feasible, but we hadn't answered yet, will anyone actually pay for this? Is this a business? Is this problem big enough that customers are willing to pay for a solution to fix it? So I think not understanding the process we were going through from a discovery perspective led to a lot of tension more on the unhealthy side where, like for instance, one of the, ideas they really wanted to drive forward was an iOS app for a very specific European market. And when we did our discovery, we went through a lot of user testing, we did a lot of market research. We said over 90% of your target market are Android users. Like, iOS app is not the way forward. And, they didn't trust that data. They didn't trust the research because they were so close to the idea and they had become so biased by it. So for me, that was quite a difficult situation because it was also educating this team on the approach we were taking, that, it's much better to go through this process where we can validate and iterate and, pivot early as opposed to spending all this money building the wrong product. So for me, that was quite difficult because it was an education piece, but also, we were working with them, we were charging them, we were trying to drive that engagement forward too. So for me, that's when it moved into the unhealthy realm.
Thank you. Any other examples of kind of what unhealthy tension looks like?
I have one. It's maybe not an example, but just a sort of a mindset. Amazon has a leadership principle: disagree and commit. And for me, that's sort of like what perfect tension should be. That you have the disagreement, so that people, like in your example, would say, "Hey, but look at the data. It shows that 90% of users are on Android. Why do we need to look into iOS? This is my disagreement. I'm encouraged. I'm not scared. I'm motivated to bring this discussion and disagree. And then whenever the decision is made, that everyone commits to it, and that they're not like fed up, or that the iOS developers are upset and saying, hey, this is all nonsense what's happening, but they say, we understand it, that's why we're going forward. So I think you need this balance of being willing to disagree, but also when it comes down to the decision, that everyone on the team comes back together and commits to the decision.
And Graham, have you got any thoughts on what we can do as product people to create an environment like that? Because I talk about disagree and commit in the book. It's very much ingrained in the Amazon culture. But let's assume you and I work at a company where it's that's not one of our values. We're an early stage startup, and Graham and I have a massive disagreement, and we're about to come to blows. Right. So we learn from that experience. So we're going to look for a way of creating the environment where it is, we have these kind of constructive conversations. We look at the data, we look at the pros and cons and arguments. And even if we don't reach consensus, we're going to commit. What can we do as product people to influence a culture or a way of working like that? Have you got any thoughts, Graham?
I'm not sure how successful I've been in the past on that particular scenario. It's a real challenge, and I think you talked about it in writing your book, Mark, about this startup example is a really good example, and you see a lot in enterprise as well, where people have domain expertise. But in the startup world, where I think you and I probably had something similar, where you're in a product leadership position, it's challenging because you come in. You're effectively behind the 8 ball a lot of times when you come in, because most of the times founders don't tend to really want to hire product people, normally, because they're the product people that started driving that business. So you come in and it's a challenge. Normally when you're hired, you're hired because there are already issues, and challenges within the business. To Aislinn's point, desirability, viability, and so on. It very rarely is a technical issue. It's normally about, it's about, will somebody actually buy the product, and is it the right thing, So I think, we talked about data, but I think sometimes we sort of say, well, we've got the data, whereas, just looking into it and trying to understand the accuracy, is it vanity, is it vanity metrics? Do we have the right data? Is it the right data to look at the right problem? So one of the things that I always try and do is, in the first few weeks in a new role or first month, I try to understand the data that's in the company, how it's driving decisions, and if it needs to, instrumenting the product with at least more analytical data that you can use, because once you have data, it feeds into a lot of things. It feeds into things like if you have a North Star or a one metric that matters, it's all connected. So if you have that North Star and you have the wrong data, you need to address that. But if you have those two things, it starts to take a lot of opinion out of it. So you and I, Mark, may disagree, but if the data's there, and there may still be somebody who will make a decision otherwise, but you've done everything you can. I think as a product person, to Amir's point earlier, there's stuff you can control and there's stuff you can't, but you try and do your best with the things you can control.
And flip it a little bit. So I like what you're saying about the data, and that that takes a sting out of the conversation. It becomes less about the mind, if you like, and it's much more about the data and the evidence. But I think Emma's making a point here where she says, I've seen unhealthy tension in the past where there's a lack of respect or transparency. It's then less about differing opinions being discussed and can move into conflict territory. And it's interesting what Emma says here about respect, because I think there was a comment before, I can't remember who it was from, but it said, is being agreeable, is that valuable quality? Christian, thank you. You can see it on the screen now. That's my first question, right? Because I've learned the hard way, and I've learned, I always say as a product manager, my goal in life is not to be invited to my colleagues or stakeholders' birthday parties. It's nice if it happens, but I'm not here to make people happy other than the customer. But I am, what I try to achieve is I'm trying to be respected and trusted. Again, different to being liked or being agreeable. I think it's about respect and trust. So we're in a situation that for whatever reason, I'm not necessarily respected. I'm working with a senior stakeholder or someone who's got a lot of domain expertise and who thinks, Mark, what are you bringing to the table? And I come with my data, but they've already committed to an idea or their opinion is way more important. How do we navigate those situations? Amir, I see you smiling. Any thoughts on that?
I was just thinking about something that happened in a previous role where I spent a bunch of time preparing for a quarterly planning presentation. I presented it to essentially the CPO, the CMO, and a bunch of heads of products and stuff. And the CMO was like, "Thank you so much for presenting that. This is why your idea is terrible." So I was just kind of thinking about that moment. Ultimately, to be honest, I think when it comes to this sort of stuff, I try to just assume that the people have the best intentions. And if there is tension, is more just there's some sort of alignment issue. Either they're I'm probably not in alignment with them, and I just need to bridge that gap and understand what it is they're looking for. So with this, this situation with the CMO, it was just that she thought we would be doing A, but we ended up doing B. And then once I realized that we were in alignment, we weren't in alignment, we kind of bridged that gap and were able to meet in the middle. And to be honest, I think as a result of that tension, that disagreement, we went back. I went and re-examined my plans and really questioned is this the right thing to do? We modified them a little bit, and it resulted in a better outcome overall. So yeah.
Excellent. And if I can switch gears for a moment, we talked right in the beginning, and I think, Amir, you mentioned it, but I'd love to know, because one of the tensions is that kind of desire for certainty that lots of people feel, try working with the finance team or the accountants. They look for certainty. Or I've seen organizations with program management offices where they plan for the next 6 years in an amazing spreadsheet that the world hasn't seen before. Whereas, like I think Amir mentioned in the intro, like as product people, we almost embrace uncertainty. That's our world. That's how we operate. Lots of unknowns. We're open about those. We try to test and validate. But I think it's important to realize that lots of people that we work with aren't used to that, don't like that. Zara, how do we navigate that? Have we got any tips for people who have that exact challenge in their organization?
I think a twofold. On one hand, understand where their concerns and need for certainty is coming from. For example, if it's the finance team and they're worried about some legal requirements that they may have with specific finance topics, that's something you can't really avoid, or it's pretty clear what needs to be done in that case. Maybe it's something else and they're worried about the company reaching their profitability goals for the year that's a bit tight and want to make sure they can do that. So understand what the goal is. And I think when you have this understanding, they'll feel a little bit relaxed and their need for certainty will decrease a bit. To come to maybe a level that you say, hey, we can reach that certainty, and then try to commonly define what's the first small step to gain certainty. Maybe they would say, okay, we need some huge experiment in a scientific study, and you say, hey, that's going to be 1,000 story points for my team and take 10 years. We're never going to do that to find this out. But I think maybe a small step to find this out, something that you can do within a day or within a week, or a little experiment, or do a quick survey, or check the competition. There are so many little things you can do to say, hey, we're a little bit more certain, to see if that's going in the right direction. So mutual understanding on what the problem is, and then try to define little steps to take to increase the certainty without blocking it or leaving them with no certainty, because that's also not going to be a good thing long term.
Gotcha. And Aisling, is there anything you've experienced in terms of that balance between certainty and uncertainty?
Yeah, I think even the definition is making sure that people know uncertainty is we don't know everything. This is the information we have. These are the assumptions we've made. Here are the risks based on we don't know certain things, as opposed to, maybe team members who don't work in a similar discipline to us see uncertainty as, you've just guessed that. You've went like eeny, meeny, miny, mo. We are still using the data that's available to us. We're speaking to our customers. We're, using our observability tools to analyze how our users are using the products today, where their pain points are. We've delved into them. Like Zara said, we've hypothesized, we've experimented. For me, the biggest thing is being transparent. Like, I have made this decision because of this reason. We have defined the success criteria as a team. So being really upfront and sharing that with the wider company, the wider teams, so that, they understand, although it's uncertain in that we don't have all the information in an ideal world we would have where the answer is so obvious, they are calculated moves, that they haven't just been kind of someone came up with an idea and we said, yeah, let's go for it. Yeah. We have went through the process of, experimenting and making sure that we feel comfortable that based on the data we have, also our experience, we do this day in, day out. So I think, like a lot of people have mentioned in the comments, like trust and respect, that we have for our colleagues and they have for us. And so for me, it's really around even the definition of uncertainty.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask one more question, but in the meantime, I would love you to, if you have any questions that we should cover as part of this conversation, please start dropping them in. I've seen some great comments, but any specific questions about things that we haven't covered, or maybe to build on some of the things that we've talked about, would be great. Because I have one question before we do that, because we talked about influencing, and one of the things, again, I've learned about being a product person is that we're often in a position where we're not the mini CEO or whatever it's called. We are in a position where we have to influence a lot of different people and moving parts without having any authority over or control over those. Have you got any tips or techniques, or maybe do's and don'ts, things that might not have worked for you as well, but in terms of influencing without authority?
I have a little tip, sort of, I think one thing that's really important, especially with the team with you work, if it's, for example, a team of software developers, is that they have a sense of ownership for the product. I think that we have the term we sometimes use, code monkeys, who just want the story, get it done, and they don't care. They're maybe not as involved as part of the whole product team. So one thing I really like to think that I think that helps them with the influencing them is the ownership and one side to show what's the result. So if anything happens, I always give them an update. Hey, this is how our A/B test is going. Here's the results. And one little thing we do before every refinement, for example, is I start with a fun fact. Hey, what % of Internet Explorer users are above the age of 65? And then they're all laughing and they find out a little bit about a user. So just this sort of fun fact to always include some data, some information, some knowledge that really keeps them engaged with the product and feeling a sense of ownership. And then they're more involved with the development of the product as well.
Amazing. Any other tips or techniques, or maybe pitfalls to avoid when it comes to influencing?
I could probably offer a lot of pitfalls, but I'll try not. I'll try not to do that. I mean, actually, one thing from Amir's point earlier, and a pitfall that I'd fallen into previously in that example, like a quarterly review, where I delivered a kind of, quite a challenging message, but I dropped the bomb in a meeting in front of a lot of senior stakeholders, and not had separate conversations in advance to kind of manage and maybe sound people out, about what I was hoping to talk about. And that's a valuable and painful lesson that you learn. You need to do it once, and then you do learn. But I think don't do that. Don't do that in a big meeting in front of people. People don't like being surprised, with that kind of news. It sounds obvious, but it's really easy to do because you get excited about this new thing that you've found. Probably the biggest thing I think that's worked really well, and it's pretty basic, is just like an assumptions canvas or something, just documenting assumptions. And again, I would say I haven't done this as much as I should have. It should be something like every product person does, which assumptions, what are our joint assumptions, what are joint commitments, what are joint risks? Because most of your decisions and your strategy will be built on assumptions, but they're not written down anywhere. So that would be the big one for me.
Excellent. No, I couldn't agree with you more. Thanks for sharing that. Definitely pre-meetings and preparing people goes a long way, as you say, Graham. We have a question from Emer, who says, any helpful phrases to diffuse conversations that are full of tension or are potentially, have the potential to really blow up? Any ways of diffusing that?
For me, one thing that has helped in those kind of conversations where there's quite a lot of tension is, trying to take any heat out of the conversation where people are getting like emotionally attached to their idea, so it's becoming defensive. One thing that I try to do is repeat what the other person is saying with, the language I want to use that takes that heat out of it, but also lets them know, like, I'm listening to you, I'm trying to empathize and see things from your perspective. I may not agree, but while you're talking, I'm not sitting thinking, what am I going to respond with so that my idea sounds better? I am actually actively listening and want to understand why you disagree.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can maybe add to that, two things. First of all, and this is, you could argue, a basic feedback rule, but again, learned the hard way, is decoupling the person from the issue at hand or the feedback. So it's really not about the person, but it's about maybe behavior or decision or an action, or the situation at hand is a key one. And I think also, and I talk about this in the book, this technique of plussing. So even if I think, the idea is not good, I've listened to it, I'm going to break it down and explain why I don't think it's the best and based on data. But then by simply using the word "and" is coming up with an alternative way of looking at it or alternative suggestions. So what you're doing is you're not just saying this is rubbish, I'm going to dismiss this idea, and then, you're on your own to figure out what to do next. But you're giving that constructive feedback where you come up with an alternative suggestion. Any other thoughts on taking the heat out of those kind of difficult and challenging conversations?
Maybe reflecting, you said to use the word and on the other side to not use the word but. So you said we should also have the iOS app, but that sort of negates everything that you just positively said. So try to go more to that. At the same time, we see that 90% of users are on Android. What do you think about that? So sort of just validate their point, give your point, and then leave the next discussion up to them.
Excellent. Question from Ailish, who says, if you feel tension but do not understand the deeper reasons for it, how do you get to the bottom of that tension? Amir, any thoughts or experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you gotta ask why. What is this person's like? What do they want to achieve? Like, where is this tension coming from? Why do they disagree with me so much? And just try to understand. Yeah, I think Aisling put it nicely. Just understand their mindset and walk in their shoes. Like, often I think it can be as simple as that. Just ask them why. Just keep probing and probing and probing until you get to the core of it. And often you'll probably find out that you're probably in closer alignment than you think, and that makes it just much, much easier to bridge the gap and diffuse the tension and move forwards.
Excellent. Any other thoughts on that in terms of the getting to the bottom of why there's tension?
There are some great tools out there. There's a team alignment .co, and it's got tools, and it's got a fact finder kind of canvas, and it has these little questions, and it's just similar to what Mark, you and Zara are saying. It's just slightly different ways, but maybe building on what Amir's sort of saying, it's slightly different ways of asking the why and trying to understand, because sometimes the tension is just based on language. We're all speaking slightly different language. There are other concepts like where I've seen work really well, that kind of idea of ubiquitous language. You're saying account, you're saying invoice. Are we talking about the same thing? Sometimes we're arguing, going, that's absolutely not the right solution for that, but we're not actually talking about the same thing. And I think sometimes just having that ubiquitous language and those fact-finding little questions, I think, are really useful. It's difficult to remember to implement those though, so it's sometimes you remember later and you're like, I really should have used that at that point. But if you have that front of mind, the more and more you use it, the more it becomes more natural.
Gotcha. And the question from Damien, who asks, does the panel feel tension can arise from strong personalities on a team, challenging your decisions or ideas, and how do they deal with that for positive outcomes? So this is the question where you have very vocal people, or people are quite attached to again, an idea or a desire. How do you deal with that in a positive and constructive way?
For me, it's, I've worked with a lot of teams with strong personalities who typically disagree with each other as well. Something that's really important for me is to make them feel like they are part of the journey. They're part of that discovery while we're making the decision. They're involved kind of start to end from, for me, success for us as product professionals is having the entire team understand what is the problem we're fixing, who is the user, why are we working on this? So for me, it's been really important to actually include people throughout the process. A recent example, I have a lot of the engineers on the team I am working on at the minute, we're user testing, we're piloting something at the minute. So I was giving them a summary of the sessions, this is what users are saying for the product that you're building, but they just got a summary from me. And, I didn't feel like it was resonating enough. So I started to invite them along to watch the sessions, and they loved it. They loved being part of the process and actually hearing the exact same words from a customer as opposed to me drove it home so much more. They got to see a real user using a product they had built. And for me, again, a lot of those strong personalities, if I was disagreeing with something they said or someone else on the team, this really drove it home because, you're seeing firsthand why that does work or why that doesn't. And so for me, involving people throughout really helps with making people understand why you're saying no.
Yeah, I think I can only plus one that. For me, the key word there is context. Lots of people I've worked with and have come across over the years, they like to be involved early enough, and they just, again, to the point we made earlier, they want to understand the why, they want to be involved in the context, and that goes a long way, both in terms of building up those trusted relationships as well and the influencing. So thank you for sharing that. And we've got a question from Rosa, who asks, tension can come from biases or assumptions not spelled out by other stakeholders who don't work closely with the product. How do you tackle these kind of unspoken biases or assumptions? For instance, assumptions about the customer. So again, they're not necessarily, like we said earlier, documented in a canvas quite neatly. They're kind of almost implicit. How do you tackle those? Anyone? Amir, any thoughts?
This is a hard one. Sorry, I'm trying to think of an example where this has happened. I'm kind of struggling a little bit, to be honest.
Anyone else? Personally, I really spend a lot of time with stakeholders who are, because that's the hardest part, who are not as close to the product. It's easy to spend a lot of time with people who have a skin in the game, are engaging. It could be the exec sponsor or, direct beneficiaries from the work you're doing. That's I'd say relatively easy in air quotes in terms of taking them on a journey and engage them early and often. But I really I've learned to spend more time with people who are more removed and really understand their mindset, having those conversations of what are you thinking? These are the options. And again, you're not asking them like, what are your assumptions? Because they might stare at you and think, what is he on about? But those kind of questions really to get the understanding, a bit like Aisling was saying, is where they're coming from. It's that kind of empathy, right? Is just understanding what is important to you. How do you make decisions? How do you view the world? What thoughts do you have about the customer? And just by having those relationships, it's much easier to then ask those questions and build up that understanding. If I move on, because there's quite a few questions still coming through, which is amazing. So please keep them coming, because I know we've got a few more minutes, which is great. Because Rick is asking, what are your favorite techniques for identifying unknowns or risky assumptions?
One thing we did is before we started our last initiative, we did a pre-mortem. So post-mortem is normally if something goes wrong, then you say, oh, these are all the things that went wrong. And then I really dramatized it. I said, I just got fired as a product owner. That was the worst initiative ever. Our company's going bankrupt. What went wrong with this initiative? And then it just came a lot of ideas, and we could compile them to see what's the likelihood, what's the uncertainty. And I think that really helped us before we started to align us and then find where the risks are, and then go on to see how we can validate them.
Excellent.
Before they come into question.
I love, a great pre-mortem, and the more morbid you can make it, the better. So yeah. I suppose I've done it on a whiteboard with a big tombstone and saying, so this is where the product lies and what needs to go wrong. But as you say, what you're doing at that stage is you're doing in a safe environment, particularly because you haven't done anything yet. So you can really, in a safe space with the right people in the room, brainstorm about what could potentially go wrong. You can do that through different lenses. So not just from an implementation point of view, but from a commercial point of view, from a customer point of view. So that's a great one. Thank you, Zara. Any other thoughts, Greg?
Yeah, I suppose, in some organizations, I remember at Ticketmaster, they did this very well about dependency management, and a lot of times about dependency management, it was, you're kind of identifying known unknowns, kind of, that kind of as a Donald Rumsfeld, I think, popularized that. But you're kind of identifying that. But the thing about dependencies is you're just putting it down in, in some sort of tool or a spreadsheet, and you haven't worked out a way to address it. So it's something that needs to happen. And it may be something, to your point, Mark, it may be a technical dependency. It may be a product dependency. I need to go and do discovery and whatever else. I need to instrument the product, but it may be a commercial dependency. It could be something around our business model. We need to understand that more. So, I've seen that where they build the dependencies, it can be a simple spreadsheet. So it's dependency of on a dependency on, and it has a person responsible for it. And I think that's really, really powerful. I see one of the feelings of product and engineering teams is they look at dependencies. It's always an engineering dependency, right? It's always a technical challenge. My experience is that's a much lower percentage than the real dependencies. You know, it's the user, it's the business, it's the culture of the organization. Are we even set up to implement this product and release it into the wild? So there's a lot of that. So I think that's something. It even just starts the conversation, just starts to get people thinking about, you know, risks. You know, it's almost like a framing, you know, piece for that.
Absolutely. And we've got a question from Dobromir, who says, this is quite a general statement, but I might flip it a little bit, because he asks, what do you do if the developers don't care about the product? I think there's more to this question from Dobromir, but I can't ask him at the moment. But how do you get, you know, is that let me twist it slightly. Do you accept that? Do you get them involved? To Ashling's point earlier about getting people involved early and often, is there anything you can do about it or find a way around it?
So one of the things that I do when I first start working with a team is just to try to understand like the motivations of what every single developer cares about as best as I can, because, you know, different people have different needs, they have different interests. I've worked with engineers in the past who just like slavishly care about impact. That's it. There's one engineer I'm thinking about who told me several times, she was like, I hate programming, but I like to see numbers go up, you know? So when I'd be talking to her, I would frame everything in that context. It's like, yeah, this is going to move this number from here, and this is going to drive amazing amounts of impact. Whereas there are other engineers, they actually didn't care about what the customer impact was at all, or even the business impact. They just really cared about like solving difficult technical issues or playing with like some new piece of tech or something like that. So when I'd be pitching or, you know, talking through an idea with them, I'd be pitching it in that sort of parlance, you know, hey, like this gives you the opportunity to experiment or use this thing which you're interested and excited in. And yeah, generally I found that's like worked. I think sometimes, you know, there are times where you kind of have to put your foot down and say, sorry, mate, I know you disagree, but we just kind of need to do this. But personally, I try to avoid playing that card as infrequently as I can, mainly because I want to, you know, I want people to come on this cool journey with me, and I want them to be excited about their work. So yeah. Excellent.
And I think to add to what you're saying, there's a really nice model I came across a few years ago, and again, I put it in the book, which is, it's all about influencing without authority by Bradford and Cohen are the creators of that model. And what it is really, how do you build up trusted relationships with people when you don't necessarily have authority over them? And one of the ways, and you describe it really nicely, Amir, is understanding the kind of currencies that are relevant to the people that you're dealing with. Because then, you know, you exchange currencies, right? You understand what's relevant to you. And you understand what's relevant to the other person. So one of them, for instance, is a task-related currency. So lots of people I work with, they really value anything you can do to help them get unblocked or get a task over the line. That gives them energy, right? Whereas other people, they really like the currency around inspiration. So they really want to know that context, and they want to know the vision, and that gives them energy. Yes, the task, great, but, you know, vision. Whereas those task people, vision, yeah, whatever, help me with the task. Equally, you have people where status is a big currency, so looking good in front of your team or your boss and stuff. Well, if you know that, and as long as you do it generally, you can really bear that in mind and play with that, and to build up that trusted relationship, because you understand what's important to the other person. Absolutely. Is there anything else you would say to Dobromir from your experience? And we've asked him to elaborate, but, you know, because I like the Amir example. Is there anything else you'd add to that?
I would have one sort of maybe funny thing. It's sort of touching on that. Our team is very motivated to know what sort of impact did we have on the business side and for the customer. And on the business side, you can sometimes measure it monetarily. So if we see something, we sort of have the, not just, hey, we increased conversion this much, because those couple percent points, who understands it anyway, if they're sort of working in a different world. So I convert it into a villa in Mallorca. Hey, because of this, we can all go to a villa in Mallorca for 2 weeks and afford that as a team of 9 people. And then it's sort of a funny gag that we always have, hey, this helped us to get 1 week of the villa in Mallorca. So just find something that sort of, or go out for a pizza pizza and beer evening, whatever it may be, just to have that social thing and thing that keeps it lighthearted and whatever their motivation may be. Or pizza, beer, and a village in Mallorca, I can say work pretty well.
Definitely. I see. This is a title for another book, but anyway, different conversations are. Thank you for sharing. I'm conscious of time, but I think we've got room for maybe 2 more questions. And one is coming from Connor, who says, when company revenue ambition is at odds with what the customer is asking for, which is a very common tension, I agree, and is best for customer, any tips for those scenarios? When a feature is closely tied to revenue, Connor says it's very hard to challenge. So again, customer versus company revenue and profit.
I suppose, Mark, I worked in a startup where I suppose what we were doing for revenue was consultancy, and we did revenue for consultancy, and we were trying to build a platform at the same time. So a lot of the effort was built on that consultancy revenue. It's a difficult one. I don't like, as a product person, it's a big challenge there. You know, all you can do is highlight that if we keep doing consultancy, we'll not build out the platform that we need to deliver the longer term revenue. But it is hard to challenge because it's revenue to Zara's point, that pays for the villa in Mallorca or Ibiza. You know, it's what keeps the lights on in the organization, you know, and pays for a team in a larger organization. So that's a challenge. I would probably flip this a little bit and just think about the model, you know. So sometimes a lot of organizations are focused on reducing cost avoidance. They'll call it, dress it up as that, right? But and that's the focus. Whereas you can flip it to be more like generating new revenue, slightly more positive model. But on this example, you know, if you can look at the model and how can we reduce cost, or how can we focus on opportunity cost, you know, of building out a new platform as opposed to going after, you know, that revenue model. But this is not easy. This is not easy stuff, you know, like, and if it was, we probably wouldn't be talking about it on the panel. But I know people are looking for solutions. So if anyone has any ideas, I'm all ears.
Even if there's not a silver bullet, any other thoughts on how you can even just strike that balance?
For me, one thing is also looking at, in terms of, you know, what's best for the customer, what the customer is asking for. If it's different from, you know, where we're getting revenue, is, you know, one tip that I give to my teams, even if they're raising something like technical debt, it's, you know, help me articulate what is the value of doing this versus the risk of not doing it. So in this example, you know, if a customer is asking for something, are we at a risk of losing, you know, customers? Are we going to lose the customers that are actually giving us this revenue because we're not listening to them? So I think it's all highlighting the risk of not listening to our customers, because, you know, even if they're separate products, if the same customer is not happy with their experience, they're going to look elsewhere.
Yeah, I think for me, I don't know if that's helpful, Connor, but it's a lot of what we do as product people comes down to storytelling. And be clear, I'm not saying lying or fibbing or playing with the truth, but sometimes, you know, I think, to the point you made, Graham, I don't think it's, you know, I'm not saying it's easy, but equally, I don't think it's impossible to make a case for specific customer improvements. What I do find from experience is that you have to work a bit harder. So I have to explain a bit to Aisling's point of, if we don't do it now, it will have, maybe not short term, but longer term, have an impact on revenue, or people are not going to complete the key jobs that they want to do through our product. But again, it's about telling that story if you don't necessarily have the hard numbers and the bottom line kind of impact to show for it. Before we hand back to Aisling, can I just do one last question, which is coming from Aaron, who says, complimenting Dobromir, and Dobromir asked us about, you know, developers that don't necessarily care about the product. What can we do, and which techniques can we use to stimulate a sense of ownership in the team in order to avoid situations like Dobromir stated, where people just don't care? Shared sense of ownership. Any tips or tricks?
So I guess like a couple of things I do is, one, just constantly like reiterate what impact the work we're doing is going to have on the customer and also on the business. And then wherever possible, make sure there's a feedback loop so that people actually see the results of the actions that they're taking, the work they're doing. It's super, super important. Like every time we have a planning session, I kick it off with 5 minutes of, here are the metrics, these are the things we've shipped, and this is how it's impacting the user. And also, we spoke to some people, and here's a couple of anecdotes and things we've pulled out. This is what our product is actually doing, and that that really helps. It's the first thing. The second, I actually recommend a book which is by a dude called it's like David Marquette or something, called Turn the Ship Around, which is all about he basically goes into a submarine and turns it from the worst ship in the US Navy and turns it into the best. And it's a strangely entertaining story. It's a really good book. So I recommend reading that. But if you just want I guess the summary and the practical elements, there's an engineer who used to be at Uber, a dude called Gurgley, who blogs at, I think it's pragmaticengineer.com. He's got a great blog which basically takes that book and tells you exactly how to apply it to software teams and really instill ownership and make sure it's got just lists of processes and documents all ready to implement. So highly recommend checking that out.
Excellent. One more thought or tip for Aaron before we wrap.
I have one, and one of my colleagues mentioned it 2 weeks ago, and then I tried it out and it really helped. In Scrum, with the new update, there's this idea of the product goal. And then he said he really involved the team in defining that product goal, even though that's maybe more of the product person's responsibility, so that they have stakes in that and are involved. And then before every planning, we would normally say, what stories are we going on? What's the goals we sort of have? And then define our sprint goal in the last minute. That was how we did it, and it wasn't so good. And this colleague switched it around to say, okay, what's our goal for the sprint at the beginning of the planning? And not to give it to the team, but to have the team involved. And then that helped their ownership in defining what stories will be taken into the sprint, and that they have a sense of ownership for setting that and what they're doing. And it seemed to work very well. And I tried it with my team, and we were really much more aligned. They were much more engaged into saying, no, we don't need this technical story. We should do this because it will help us progress to this goal. And I thought, hey, great, cool. So I can suggest really involving them with the goal setting.
Excellent. On that note, and I see a question coming in, what was the name of the Uber engineer? Was it Gurgi, you said? But, I'm sure if you go to pragmaticengineer.com, we can put the link in the chat, no doubt. You'll find it out. Can I just, before we hand back to Stephen and Aisling, can I just thank you so much, Aisling, Zara, Amir, Graham, really great discussions, very honest sharing of your real life examples and tips and tricks. So hope people will join me in the comment section with just my virtual kind of clapping and stuff to thank you so much for your input tonight. Really enjoyed the conversation. I'm going to start, and I hope to see much more clapping in the comments and stuff. That's always, the trick. No, thank you so much. And with that said, I'll hand back to Stephen. I think Stephen doesn't want to wrap it up. Graham, can you say something as one of the co-organizers?
Yeah, I can wrap it up, even though I've got the face for radio. Thanks everyone, our other panelists, and thanks Marc very much for agreeing to host the talk. It's fantastic to have you lead the panel, and I would highly recommend Marc's book. So it's slightly different. It's not just a lot of frameworks and theory. There's a lot of practical advice in there as well. So yeah, you should go out and have a look at it. So thanks everyone. And as Ailey said, we have another meetup on the 24th of March. David Bland, Testing Business Ideas from Strategizer. Have a look at the book on Amazon. It's amazing. There's Ailey's doing the promo. We are not being incentivized, by the way, on any discounts or anything, but yeah, I highly recommend it. So thanks everyone, and good night.